A question related to this topic and related to our entire conversation right now. Um, People are right now, as you say, feeling more vulnerable. They're more concerned about losing loved ones, just seeing, death rates rise. Even if you don't know anyone, seeing all these death rates rise every day throughout the world is troubling. Do you think it's a good thing to think about death and our mortality? And even if I suspect you'll say, yes, it is a good thing. Is it a good thing to think about it regularly? Because I wonder whether, in a sense, if you really come to terms with it, it might liberate you. But there's also the danger that it could perhaps depress you.
It's a very good question. We've spoken in this conversation about mortality, and I think that some of the time perhaps we're in denial about the reality of our existence, and I don't think that's ever good. I think being honest and truthful about our condition is important. And we sometimes try and cover up from ourselves in the West some of the hard, brutal reality of life. We don't like remembering that so much of our wealth and the clothes that we wear are built on the back of extreme poverty in the third world. And we outsource the suffering into the faraway lands so we don't need to see it up close. We sometimes don't like seeing people sleeping rough in our nice, comfortable middle-class areas, and we want them to be moved off the streets so that they're out of sight and mind. We don't like realizing that our life is still dependent on people that work the soil, that still get dirt under their fingernails. We like imagining that food arrives vacuum packed in the kosher kingdom or at the click of the mouse from an Amazon order. And I think that being in denial about the rough and tumble nature, the reality of what it means to be a human and how we have finite existence here on earth is not a healthy thing. Shechita, the ritual slaughter of animals, gets a lot of bad press. And one of the reasons it gets bad press is because it just looks very bloody. It's very messy. It doesn't mean that in truth it's a cruder way of killing an animal than the bolt to the brain, which just causes a slow death to the animal. But in pictures and imagery, it looks very harsh. And it may well be that this is part of the reason why the Torah wants us to kill an animal that way, to realize and recognize that we're taking a life at that moment, and that this is a significant achievement, and one we only have the right to do if we do it with care and if we live up to our responsibility as human beings. And therefore, sometimes being in denial about mortality and denial about the roughness of life is not a healthy thing. Now, does this need to be depressing? I don't think so. I think it's part of the reality of life, and therefore it's something that we need to come to terms with. And as I've tried to explain, it can be life affirming. It can be a reminder to appreciate every second of the gift of life that we have. The other thing to mention over here is, of course, that in terms of Jewish thinking, we don't believe that death is the end. We speak about the soul, the neshama. These are sometimes mystical terms that are hard to relate to, but we can equally talk about consciousness. And we believe that ultimately consciousness survives after death. Now, this is a view that somehow often feels, it's one that we don't always feel comfortable speaking about. But we human beings, the most basic fact we know about our existence is that we are conscious. And one of the mysteries of our existence is that in truth, it's the only thing that we know about ourselves. Everything we experience from the external world, from the material world, could be an illusion. As Descartes famously taught us, it's just the fact of our own consciousness, which is the only truth we can hold on to. So we know we're conscious, but we have no idea about how consciousness interacts with the physical world.
It's very scary to think about.
It's possible that our physical brains and bodies somehow give rise to consciousness, and as the physical body deteriorates, our consciousness deteriorates with it. But we have no idea how that mechanism would work. How can a combination, a complex arrangement of ultimately physical material of neurons give rise to consciousness, to that sense of I, to the inner knowledge I have that I am an experiencer? We have no idea about that. And it's equally possible that our physical brains and bodies are the interface through which our consciousness interacts with the world. But that as they deteriorate, the interface deteriorates. But upon death and the removal of our physical bodies, our consciousness still continues. Let me give you an analogy. Imagine every human being was born with goggles permanently over their eyes. And we witnessed that as these goggles became scratched, our eyesight deteriorated. And someone told you one day that if the goggles were completely removed, our eyesight would be restored. So we'd say that's impossible. Clearly, it's the goggles that give rise to eyesight. And we see that as they deteriorate, our eyesight deteriorates. But in fact, we know that model is wrong. The goggles are simply the interface through which our vision we can see and experience vision. And if the goggles are removed, then the vision is restored. And similarly, it's true that we witness that with the deterioration of the body and the brain, our minds and consciousness's ability to interact with the outside deteriorates. But we have no reason to think that consciousness itself deteriorates also. And therefore, we quite simply have two models of consciousness. It's possible that the physical body and the brain gives rise to the mind and to consciousness. And it's equally possible that consciousness exists independently and simply interacts through our physical body. And Judaism adopts that latter model. And there's nothing illegitimate philosophically or scientifically about that worldview. It adopts that model and it argues that our consciousness survives, that we have within ourselves this sense of our infinite existence, this sense of the possibility that we as humans can touch that which is divine, that which is infinite. And one of the ways we can do that are through acts of kindness and meaning and absolute worth and morality. The little acts of kindness that we do can be something that can touch upon the infinite and touch upon true meaning, and therefore can remain forever. And therefore, the second reason why us coming to terms with our mortality and physical mortality is healthy and positive is because it reminds us that we humans can rise above mere physical existence. We can be beings which are little less than divine. We can be beings that can touch that which is infinite, that which is immortal, that which is eternal, by doing acts of eternal godly value, by imitating God, by doing acts of morality and kindness. And therefore, for both those reasons, I think it is healthy for us to recognize our mortal limitations, because it's part of the reality of life. There's no point being in denial about that, because it doesn't need to be depressing, because it can remind us to appreciate the gift of life, and because it reminds us that we humans are capable of rising above the limitations of physical existence and achieving immortality if we make the right choices and touch upon immortality in the way we live.
Would you feel the same way if you were talking to someone who was an atheist that didn't believe in an afterlife? Would you tell them better not to think about it?
I think that many of those who think that they don't believe in God, as long as they still believe in absolute values, also are buying into the belief that there are things of absolute infinite worth. And as long as you buy into the idea that there are things of real moral value, of real spiritual achievement, then in some levels, we are fellow travelers. It would be far better, of course, if it was understood that this is about a real relationship to a God who cares about us, who loves us, and has given us the gift of life. But ultimately, anyone who recognizes that we humans can achieve things of absolute worth is part of infinite godly existence, whether they know it or not.
Wow, fascinating. To stay up to date with JTV content, click subscribe here if you're on YouTube and hit the alarm bell. And if you're on Facebook, hit the like button, and under following, click see first. If you enjoy watching JTV content and want to help us continue to grow, please consider making a donation to us by clicking here.